find out a little bit more tomorrow, obviously, when they check it out to see what the extent of it is. But that's what it was.
We're a team that cares, right? Like you're a team that naturally cares. What
actually fairly close to coming back in the game.
I know in the offseason, a lot of us were memeing the Philadelphia 76ers, saying that the union of Paul George and Joel Embiid is two of the most disappointing superstars in NBA history, teaming up to disappoint their fan bases together. But originally, I just took that as a gigantic meme. Little did we know that that was actually going to come to fruition, and things couldn't have been worse for the Philadelphia 76ers. So before we get to the content, make sure you check us out on Instagram, Snapchat, and TikTok if you want some bonus content. And now that we got all that out of the way, cue the intro. PrizePicks' new feature has been making us so much money. We've been having a lot of success on PrizePicks, and now they finally launched live squares, meaning that squares will update in real time on the app in the middle of a game. So if you see a player is being locked up on defense, you can take a lower square. Or if a player is on track for a generational game, you can take his higher square in the middle of the game. If you haven't signed up for PrizePicks, make sure you use my promo code microphone to get $50 when you make a $5 play to take advantage of this brand new feature. We've been dominating with our NBA and NFL picks, and I post them for free on my Instagram at TheFlightMike and Snapchat FlightMikeSnap. And thank you, PrizePicks, for the sponsor. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? When Joel Embiid entered the NBA, he quickly became one of my favorite players, and I think a lot of people forget how likable Joel Embiid was about 10 years ago. Literally after getting drafted to the Philadelphia 76ers, and of course going viral for his reaction to being drafted to the Philadelphia 76ers, Joel Embiid wasted no time showcasing his personality to the world, literally attempting to recruit LeBron James to his own team, which a lot of fans found to be quite humorous. And in 2017, Embiid was literally dubbed as the best tweeter in the NBA. Whether it was throwing strays at other elite talent in the NBA, roasting the referees, declaring war on LeVar and Lonzo Ball, and, well, continuing to declare war on LeVar and Lonzo Ball. He had classic tweets like this going at Draymond Green, saying, "Now that we know what it feels like to blow a big lead, gotta stay focused to get the job done." Great learning lesson, and I also love playing against Draymond. Euro stepping our way through Minnesota, and we ended up raising the cat last night. And the thing is, Joel Embiid statistically was backing this up, but he was also heading down a dangerous road. It's an archetype that we've seen many times in NBA history. The dominant center that didn't really take things too seriously. And we saw the same type of personality from Shaquille O'Neal and later on Dwight Howard. But to be honest, fans didn't really care because the Philadelphia 76ers were consistently putting Embiid in a scenario to be competitive. And they had one of the most unique assets in the NBA. In a league that was trying to replicate the Golden State Warriors, Philadelphia 76ers had by far the most dominant center in the NBA, prior to the emergence of Nikola Jokic, of course. And the Sixers consistently built dominant teams around him, whether it was selecting Ben Simmons with the #1 overall pick in the 2016 NBA draft, which would pair two of the most unserious and unmotivated superstars together of all time, or trading up from the #3 overall pick to the #1 overall pick in the 2017 NBA draft to select Markelle Fultz, a player that was supposed to be a 40% three-point shooter, was uber athletic, and had the potential to blossom into one of the greatest two-way guards in the NBA. And it's just crazy when you take a look at each and everything that went down, how many times the Philadelphia 76ers whiffed, and when they didn't whiff, they would just get really unlucky. You don't have to go into the Markelle Fultz situation at this point. We all know what happened. One of the most bizarre stories in NBA history, where Markelle Fultz found himself unable to shoot a basketball due to his thoracic outlet syndrome. We have a whole separate video on the end of his career. To this day, he's still unsigned, which is really tragic because one of the greatest what ifs in NBA history would have been, what if the Philadelphia 76ers just took Jason Tatum instead? But even then, the 76ers still built competitive teams around Joel Embiid. I mean, in the season that they gave up on Markelle Fultz, trading him to the Orlando Magic, they also swung a blockbuster trade for Jimmy Butler. Butler. And in the 2018-19 season, at a particular point, the Philadelphia 76ers had a lineup of Joel Embiid, Tobias Harris, Jimmy Butler, Ben Simmons, and JJ Redick. I mean, the construction of this roster was truly remarkable, and it was without a doubt the greatest opportunity the Sixers ever had to win a championship until, well, this happened.
Is this the dagger?
And the worst part of all is in the 2019 offseason, the Philadelphia 76ers fumbled quite possibly one of the greatest teams that they've ever had. For some reason, they thought it would be a better idea to keep Tobias Harris over Jimmy Butler.
Tobias Harris over me?
And on top of that, they felt like Al Horford would have been a great addition to the roster as well. So they decided to pursue Al Horford and have a front court of Joel Embiid and Al Horford, and move Tobias Harris to the small forward position and keep Ben Simmons at the guard position. I mean, it was a complete disaster. The floor spacing was terrible. And as a result, the Sixers would get swept in the first round against the Boston Celtics. But things would completely change for the 76ers the following offseason. They would bring in Daryl Morey as their brand new general manager, who made it seem like it was his life's mission to pursue James Harden. At the time, we all figured that it was a pipe dream, but in the meantime, the 76ers were killing it in the NBA draft. And in this particular NBA draft, they were able to select Tyrese Maxey. They placed an emphasis on acquiring shooting like Seth Curry, and they traded away Al Horford so they could bring in Danny Green. They still had Tobias Harris on a disgusting contract, and they decided to move on from Brett Brown and bring along Doc Rivers to try to develop Ben Simmons, which in of itself was very confusing. But the 2020 to 2021 season for the Philadelphia 76ers would be, one, a huge breakout season for Ben Simmons as a MVP candidate, and two, the very season that Ben Simmons would fall off of a cliff. Ben Simmons has been stagnating as a basketball player for years, and it finally caught up to him. He had a meltdown versus the Atlanta Hawks, lost his composure, and passed out of a wide open layup because he was scared of shooting free throws. And then his head coach, who is now notorious for throwing individuals under the bus, said this:
Ben Simmons can still be a point guard for a championship team like the one you guys want to become.
Yeah, David, I don't know that question or the answer to that right now.
Following this, Ben Simmons would have a colossal meltdown, completely refused to play for the Philadelphia 76ers ever again, and we have a whole different video on how his career is practically over. I'll leave that in the end screen. It's probably one of our most in-depth videos to date. But in the 2021-22 season, Daryl Morey somehow pulled a Houdini, trading a package based around Ben Simmons for James Harden. Once again, Joel Embiid had an incredibly competitive team built around him, but whenever it came time for the playoffs, Embiid just wasn't the player that the 76ers needed him to be. Now, in the 2022 playoffs, the Philadelphia 76ers had a very legitimate opportunity to beat the Miami Heat and advance to the Eastern Conference Finals. The problem was that Joel Embiid was unavailable for the first two games of the series. He played in games 3 to 6 of that series, and the Sixers would win the first two games where he was active, but they would get blown out in game 5 in Miami before losing in game 6 at Philadelphia, where Joel Embiid went 7 of 24 in 44 minutes played. And this is where the narrative surrounding Embiid would begin. James Harden would sign on for another season, and subsequently, Joel Embiid would have the best season of his career, his MVP season, the 2022 to 2023 season. But once again, it would be more of the same. As a matter of fact, you can go as far as to say that it was even worse in the 2023 playoffs. Joel Embiid would be inactive during the Sixers' final game against the Brooklyn Nets in the first round, and for game 1 versus the Boston Celtics, that the Sixers were actually able to steal from the Celtics despite being on the road and without Embiid. Joel Embiid would play in game 2 and he would go 4 of 9 for 15 points, and in game 3 where he'd go 9 of 19 for 30 points. Both of these would be losses to the Boston Celtics. The 76ers would eventually go up 3-2 against the Boston Celtics before facing off against the Celtics in a home game and a road game. And in that home game, where Joel Embiid could have potentially put the Celtics to bed, he would go 9 of 19 for 26 points in a 9-point Celtics loss. And then, in one final opportunity, in a game 7 versus the Boston Celtics, he'd go 5 of 18 for 15 points to end his season. Following this, James Harden demanded a trade, and Joel Embiid would be hurt more than usual, playing in only 39 games. But get this, the Sixers were still pretty solid without Joel Embiid. I mean, enough to potentially be playoff playoff contenders, going 16-27 without Embiid, which isn't great, but it's enough to hold the fort if Embiid returns and can carry you to good playoff seeding, which, believe it or not, Joel Embiid was able to do. He'd return an average 35 points per game off of 39% shooting from 3, and the Sixers would win 31 of the 39 games that Embiid played. Now, this included a 9-game winning streak to conclude the season, some of which Joel Embiid was inactive for. Then they would face off against the New York Knicks in the first round of the playoffs, and they would lose in the first round of the playoffs. But in this particular instance, I don't really know how much of this was Joel Embiid's fault. I mean, in this series versus the Knicks, he averaged 43 minutes per game, he dropped 50 points in a Game 3 victory, and dropped 39 points in a Game 6 loss. And given the fact that he didn't have any superstar teammate to depend upon aside from Tyrese Maxey and whatever Tobias Harris was at that point, I can't really blame him. So going into this offseason, the 76ers were one of the most attractive destinations in the NBA. They missed on signing Tobias Harris over Jimmy Butler, they missed on Ben Simmons and Markelle Fultz, they missed on James Harden, they missed on Al Horford, but their hits were just absolutely incredible hits. I mean, they hit on Tyrese Maxey in the latter part of the NBA draft, and this past offseason they made huge upgrades again. I mean, it's truly remarkable. They were able to re-sign Kyle Lowry, Kenyon Martin Jr., Tyrese Maxey, and Kelly Oubre Jr. But they weren't done then. They were able to lure over Eric Gordon from the Phoenix Suns. They added Reggie Jackson, Caleb Martin, and after an incredible Olympic run from Gershon Yabusele, they took a flyer on him as well. They signed Andre Drummond, and of course, their magnum opus signing in free agency was Paul George. But without a doubt, their best addition from the offseason, and one that we've memed on this page repeatedly and probably will continue memeing, but also giving respect to his incredible game, was Jared McCain. To start the season, Jared McCain has been absolutely incredible, averaging 15 points per game and shooting 41% from 3. He has a PER of a 21.1 and an offensive box plus minus of a 5.4, an overall box plus minus of a 4.9. But here's the problem, and it's a problem that we've discussed many times in the past. Whenever you allocate a significant amount of your budget to a player, that player better be healthy and willing to help the team. Otherwise, the handicap is too great for this team to have any success. Examples of this include the Russell Westbrook era Los Angeles Lakers. Russ was getting a supermax contract, but he shrunk the floor of the Los Angeles Lakers so much that the Lakers were playing at a significant handicap whenever Russell Westbrook was playing for them. And this is no offense to Russ. I mean, when you're not an effective player on the team that you're on, and you also cripple your ability to add depth, clearly your team's gonna go nowhere. Another example of this is the Ben Simmons era Brooklyn Nets. The Nets essentially were forced into a rebuild as they waited for Ben Simmons' contract to expire. Because he's a max contract player that averages single-digit points per game currently, you can't be competitive with a contract like that on your team. And it's truly sad, man. He's averaging like 5 points per game currently off of 57% shooting. I mean, again, we have a separate video on that in the end screen. I'll leave it for you guys there. But now the Sixers have a completely different problem. You see, Joel Embiid has been out due to injury once again, and this is something we were always very concerned about due to the fact that he just hasn't been a reliable player so far. And look, I understand if you're hurt, and I understand a lot of this isn't under our own control at times, but when you come out and say you're not going to play in back-to-backs in the beginning of the season, it just sends a particular message to your whole team. And ladies and gentlemen, it gets so much worse. Last night, the Philadelphia 76ers Big Three officially played in their first game together. Finally, Sixers fans got to see the full potential of Tyrese Maxey, Paul George, and Joel Embiid. And unfortunately, just a mere 13 minutes into this game, when Paul George was having one of his greatest games as a Philadelphia 76ers, dropping 2 points, 3 rebounds, and 2 assists off of 1 of 4 shooting from the field, Paul George would hyperextend his knee. Yes, it's the exact same knee that he hyperextended against the Atlanta Hawks about a month ago, and he's going to be out indefinitely. And you know what's really sad about this situation? Obviously, you don't want a player to ever get injured. Obviously, you want the Sixers to be at full strength. And I know I've always roasted Paul George on this YouTube channel in the past, but it's primarily because he does some truly roast-worthy things. I mean, what Paul George would do after his latest injury is probably one of the most out-of-touch things I think I've ever seen an NBA superstar do in the entire league. Literally the very next day after hyperextending his knee and needing to be out for the foreseeable future, he would drop another podcast, this time featuring his brand new teammate Reggie Jackson. No, I'm serious. It's called Players Only Meeting Leak, What's Next for the Sixers. I can only imagine how it must feel for a Philadelphia 76ers fan to be really frustrated that you're closer to Cooper Flag and getting the #1 overall pick in the NBA draft than being at the top of the Eastern Conference, seeing your highest paid player hyperextend his knee once again, and then waking up the next morning and seeing this.
I don't know how the Shams got that story or how that even leaked. The whole meeting, that's normal in the NBA. Teams go through that. I've been on multiple teams where we'll at some point have a meeting and a check-in if things aren't going right. It was positive conversation. It was healthy conversations. We're a team that cares, a team that naturally cares about what's going on with their team. They're going to have sit downs. They're going to discuss how can we get back on track.
It was just a positive meeting. Really, we sat there, just talked about the game, things that we feel like we can improve on. I'm just probably sitting here wondering how it got out.
I think this is probably the funniest clip I've ever seen. And honestly, there are some players that really should not have podcasts in the NBA. I mean, Draymond Green always gives us really funny sound bites for our YouTube channel. Over on my evil twin brother Microphone's channel, Micah Parsons always says the wrong stuff on his podcast. And in this particular instance, if you just take the context in consideration, having Paul George coming out and saying, we're a team that cares, after having Joel Embiid claim that he's not going to play in back-to-backs and be the most unreliable star in the NBA. And then Paul George, who signed a 4-year, $212 million max contract, hyperextend his knee. And that's before we get to the best player that they added over the offseason. This guy. With all due respect, when you combine all these pieces together and you have checked off all the boxes, I mean, you have great coaching, you have a two-way star in Paul George, you have a steal in Jared McCain, you have one of the NBA's young stars in Tyrese Maxey. You're supposed to have one of, if not the most dominant center in the entire NBA in Joel Embiid. You have depth in the form of Caleb Martin and Reggie Jackson and Kyle Lowry. To only have won 2 games even though you've been injured, and then to come out and say, we're a team that cares, is hilarious. The Philadelphia 76ers are truly going out sad. Currently, the Philadelphia 76ers are one of the worst teams in the NBA. Their 2 highest earning players, Paul George and Joel Embiid, haven't been healthy. And even when Joel Embiid has been playing, he has just been terrible. It seems like there's no effort from him at all whatsoever, which also doesn't look good in terms of boosting team morale. And to give an idea of how bad the Sixers are, they currently rank dead last in points per game, offensive rating, field goal percentage, and assists per game. So this has gotten so bad that Tyrese Maxey literally called out Joel Embiid for his habits as a leader, which, bear in mind, this is significant. And we talked about this when we were discussing the Minnesota Timberwolves last year. Remember, the Timberwolves should have been the team that made it to the NBA Finals last year. They had an opportunity to do so. They were favored against the Dallas Mavericks. They matched up against the Dallas Mavericks perfectly. I mean, who would have ever thought that PJ Washington would dominate Karl Anthony Towns? Who would have thought that Karl Anthony Towns would struggle offensively against PJ Washington? Yes, Anthony Edwards didn't have his most prolific game either, but Anthony Edwards was 22 years old at the time. This was Cat's team. Cat was the leader. Cat was once perceived as the once-in-a-generation type center that you could build your franchise around, and he choked when the spotlight got the brightest, and he's currently doing the same thing for the Knicks, at least defensively, and we have a separate video on that if you guys want to check it out. So according to this article, Tyrese Maxey challenged Joel Embiid in a 76ers meeting. This was following the team's 4th loss in a row, sparking veteran guard Kyle Lowry to call for a meeting, a much needed heart-to-heart and a call to action in urgency. Players and coaches held each other accountable and took fault in the start to their season. Maxey challenged Embiid to be on time to team activities, calling out the 23 league MVP about being late for everything and how it impacts the locker room. From other players to the coaching staff, sources briefed on the meeting told ESPN. Now, the article goes out to say that Maxey has nothing against Joel Embiid and he loves him, and Embiid accepted the messages sent in the meeting, but he stated that he is sometimes confused about what the 76ers are attempting to execute on the court. Currently, Maxey is highly regarded as a young leader by many in the organization, and those around the team were not surprised that he spoke up Monday. He has been out since November 7th with a strained right hamstring and is expected to return this week, either Wednesday in Memphis or Friday at home against against the Nets. Now, Shams gave us a follow-up on this on First Take.
They can't have Joel Embiid this way for the remainder of the year. This team will not come close to getting that championship aspiration that they've had. They need Joel Embiid to be engaged, for him to play at a high level. And I think that's a lot of what went on in this players team meeting that occurred.
I love how Jared McCain's probably in the back watching Embiid get criticized for hurting the team culture, and meanwhile he's filming TikToks and no one really cares. Lou Williams says this is blown out of proportion. I really don't think so. I honestly think I've seen this story way too many times, and I know how it ends. It never ends well. I mean, whether it was the 2021 Los Angeles Lakers, who didn't have enough time to recover following their win in the 2020 NBA Finals, or the 2021 Brooklyn Nets, who saw their big three only play a combined 16 games together throughout their entire lifespan together, or the Kawhi Leonard Los Angeles Clippers that featured Paul George. Every single time you see this type of scenario unfold where a team has a remarkable roster built for it, and believe me, the 76ers had the best offseason in the entire NBA. Every time we've seen this story unfold, the result is always the same. The Philadelphia 76ers got off to a bad start. Assuming this whole team is healthy in the middle of the season, maybe they can get to like a 5th seed or a 6th seed, and maybe at that point they're a first round exit. And it depends on when this team gets healthy. We've been waiting for Joel Embiid to return, and he has, and so far he hasn't looked that good either. But maybe we just need some time for this team to gel together. All in all, I think this is the best team that Joel Embiid has ever had in his career. Fans say that this team doesn't have depth, but they have Kyle Lowry, who has won a championship before and obviously isn't the player that he once was, but a great role player to have. Kelly Oubre Jr., who's proven to us that he can be a huge difference maker, particularly in the game against the Cleveland Cavaliers. He hasn't been having a great season so far, but last year he was very solid for the 76ers. Jared McCain, Andre Drummond. I mean, this team does have depth, contrary to popular belief. They just need better leadership, and maybe in order to get that better leadership, it's time to stop looking at Joel Embiid as the face of the Philadelphia 76ers and start looking at Tyrese Maxey as the Philadelphia 76ers face. Let me know what you guys think about this in the comment section down below. Apart from that, Ben Simmons' career is practically over. It's really sad to see what it's become. How do we get here? Well, I made a whole video discussing that, and I'll leave it in the end screen to meet you there. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.